Hey, let me move this. Um, hey, I'm Tanya Hendricks, and today we are talking about what does the Bible really say about women? Because there are some misconceptions, there are some misunderstandings about what the Bible really says about women, and so that is what we're going to be discussing tonight. Again, I am Tanya Hendricks. I'm an attorney, author, and I have a Master's of Divinity. So this is my JD. I have an MDiv. And so I have written a couple of books about women in the Bible, about gender equality in the church. And my latest is a Bible study called Seen, and it is about 5 biblical women who were deceived, raped, and disregarded, yet seen by God. And I just dive in and talk about the different women and some lessons we can learn from the women because so often women feel unseen and not valued. And I help women understand and know that God sees us, values us as women, and gives women value throughout Scripture so that women can live in the freedom of God's everlasting love. So last week we talked a little bit about Eve. Tonight we're going to talk about Miriam. And Miriam, as you may know, is Moses' sister. So we hear and learn about Miriam very early on, um, way back in Genesis, we're first introduced to Miriam. And um, Miriam's story, if you will recall the story of Moses, that's where we first meet Miriam. When we first read about Moses and how Moses was put in a basket by his mother, because if you will recall, that story goes back to when um, the Pharaoh was trying to wipe out all the Hebrew children. And what Pharaoh did was decreed that all of the male children should be killed. And he first told the midwives to do it, the midwives wouldn't do it. So then he told all people to do it. He's like, I just want these kids dead because he did not want to have um, some Hebrew child going up and taking over his kingdom. So he ordered all of the Hebrew children dead. And I'm trying to get to that scripture where we're talking about that. But anyway, so Moses, let's see, let me just find it real quick. Sorry, let's go back to Exodus, not Genesis, Exodus. That's why I couldn't find it. Exodus 1 is when we're first introduced to Miriam. So in Exodus 1, the Israelites are oppressed by the Egyptians. And the king of Egypt has declared that all of these male Hebrew children should be boys, should be murdered. So Miriam's mother gives birth to a little boy. And after several days of Moses's birth, the mother puts him in a basket and sticks him in the Nile River, and he floats down the Nile. And if you will recall, Miriam, or his older sister, so she is not specifically named in this verse in Exodus, this passage in Exodus, but we know her as his sister. She's the only named sister. And so we know her as his sister. And so she is watching Moses as this little basket floats down the river. This is striking because if you think about it, I mean, how many of you have younger siblings, or you're maybe young? I'm the youngest child, and I had a brother who looked out for me. So my older brother always looked out for me, and I always knew he had my back. And in times that I would get bullied or picked on, he was always the one there to look out after me and take care of me. And that's what Miriam was doing for Moses. She was watching her little brother float down, and she was looking out for him and taking care of him. So when she saw that his basket was picked up and gotten out of the Nile, she took the opportunity to be the big sister, be the protective older sister, and approach Pharaoh's daughter. So when you go back and read the story in Exodus, you'll see, and you may just remember this, but it was Pharaoh's own daughter who gets Moses out of the basket and out of the danger. So the daughter of the man who said, "Kill all the babies," is the one who finds little Moses. And it's the same one that Miriam approaches. So think about this. The very person who is trying to annihilate the Hebrew boys is his daughter that Miriam approaches. How much courage do you think that took? Even as a young girl, it took her courage to approach this person and say, "Can I get you some help?" Think about it. So she approaches Pharaoh's daughter, says, "Let me get you some help." And then not only does she get her some help, she goes and gets Moses' own mother. So she is courageous, smart, a little conniving because she's planned this, she's concocted this. But it took a lot of courage for her to do that. And so we overlook this part of Moses' story and we overlook this part about Miriam's life. But she was a very brave and courageous person, and she took on the role of being big sister. There's also showing that early in her life, she was exhibiting leadership abilities and leadership potential because she took it upon herself to not just watch as his basket floated down the river, but to approach the daughter of the man who ordered all the boys murdered. So, and then she was like, "Yeah, let me go get you a Hebrew woman," and went and got Moses' own mother. It's just to me that just amazes me. But that's just the very first time we're introduced to Miriam, and we get just a glimpse of who she is and what potential she has for as she gets older. And boy, does that potential shine later down the road. So we meet Miriam again after Moses has led the people out of Egypt. And this is in Exodus 15. So in Exodus 15:20, and let me flip there. Moses has just led the people out of Egypt. They have just crossed the river. The Were, um, Egyptian chariots have just been drowned. So this is what the part where God parts the waters. The Hebrew people walk through, and then God closes the waters back on the Egyptians and kills all of them, all the ones that were following them. So in Exodus, Exodus 15:20, it says, "Then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women followed her with tambourines and dancing." So here in Exodus 15:20, we find out a couple things about Miriam. One, she's a prophetess, and she's the first woman prophetess and prophet we hear about in the Bible. So she's the first one we learn about in the Bible, first female prophet we learn about in the Bible. Not the only one, but the first one. So we find out that she's a female prophet. What does that mean? That means she's heard from God. That means she has heard directly from God and is relaying things to the people. That is a very special gift that she is given. And there's only a few women prophets named in the Bible, or prophetesses named in the Bible, but she's the first one. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but it is a very special designation, but it means that God has spoken to her. He has revealed himself to her. And that is manifested in what she has done with the Hebrew people. But we also learn that in 1520, that she led all the women. So all the women followed her. So she led all the women in singing and dancing. They all followed her. You don't just pick up a tambourine as people start following you. There is something that happened between the time that we first met her along the Nile River to this time where the people are following her. And we don't know what roles she led, what roles she took while with the Hebrew people, while they were enslaved, and while they were marching from their position of slavery to freedom. So when they were oppressed, she was part of the group that led them out. Now, how do we also know that she was a leader? So we know here that she led the women in singing and dancing. And we know that there has to have been something else that happened with her that would cause the women to follow her and do what she was doing. So let's jump ahead and look at something else real quick, because this is where we find out that Miriam was a leader. She was a leader of her people. And it's not just here in Exodus where she's leading and dancing and singing. Look at Micah 6:4. And in Micah 6:4, God says Miriam was a leader. God says, I brought you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam as leaders. So God names Miriam in Micah 6:4 as one of the three leaders, right along with Moses and right along with Aaron. So Miriam is called out as a leader of her people. And I think it's just fascinating that God has that in Micah. Way on in history, or well, way after them, God is bringing back to the Israelites, their minds, bringing back to their memory all that He's done for them, and He brings up that Miriam was a leader. Have you seen that before? Have you noticed that before? I didn't know that until I was researching this book. And when I was researching for this book and was researching Miriam, I came across that verse. I'd never seen it before. In my 40s, I'd never seen that Miriam was called out as a leader along with Moses and Aaron. It's just amazing that God would do that. Just one, I mean, it just is just an obscure verse that, unless you are thinking in terms of, well, what does the Bible say about women? Can women be in leadership? Can women lead the church? Can women lead men? Can women be leaders at all? There's one little reference in Micah 6:4 where God says that Miriam was a leader right alongside with Aaron and Moses. Now, I also mentioned that she was a prophetess, and she was. God calls her that in Exodus, in this Exodus 15:20. He calls her out as a prophetess, which means that she was someone who heard directly from God. But what is in terms of her relationship with God, and in terms of her relationship with her brothers, let's look at Numbers 6:12. I'm sorry, dyslexic night. 12:6. Numbers 12:6. And in Numbers 12:6, Miriam gets in a little trouble. So she is a little on the outspoken side. Again, we saw that in her when she was back in the early days. She was looking out for her brother. She was being the big sister. And I think that is kind of what happened here in Numbers, because she and Aaron spoke out against Moses. And the speculation is it was about the wife. They didn't like his wife. He did not have a Hebrew wife. And so they were not happy with her and spoke out. Miriam was the only one who was punished for it. There's been different speculations to why. There's been people research that issue, wondering why it was her, why Aaron didn't get in trouble. But here's my thought. So when you look at Numbers 12:6, so what happened is they spoke out against Moses, and God is not happy because Moses is God's guy. And so here's what happened. In Numbers 12:6, God said, "Listen to my words. When a prophet of the Lord is among you, I reveal myself to him in visions. I speak to him in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" And then the anger of the Lord burned against them. When the cloud lifted, Miriam was leprous. So we learned something interesting here about prophets and 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 how God spoke and revealed himself to prophets. So God is saying here that when a prophet is among you, that he reveals himself in visions and speaks to him in dreams. So we can surmise from that, we can take from that God spoke to Miriam in visions and dreams. But for Moses, Moses was different. God spoke to Moses face to face. So he was special among the prophets. So to me, what I take from this, and looking back at what was Aaron's job, what were the things that Aaron was given? Aaron was not given the role of a prophet. Aaron was the priest. He was he A prophet is God's spokesperson, and Aaron was Moses' spokesperson. If you recall, Aaron was the one who spoke for Moses. Because when God first visited Moses at the burning bush, Moses said, "I can't really talk that good. I'm not a public speaker. I can't really say these things." So God allowed Aaron to speak on his behalf. So Aaron was Moses' mouthpiece, not God's. Moses was God's, Aaron's was Moses's. But Miriam was the prophet, and she was the one who was given dreams and visions by God, not Aaron. So when God punished them, because Miriam was the prophetess, she's the one that got punished with leprosy. But here's the other very interesting thing about that situation when she was struck with leprosy. At that time, the people who had leprosy were um, taken out of the city. They had to be separated. Well, the Israelite people refused to move until Miriam was healed. They're supposed to be on the move. They're supposed to be walking. They're supposed to be moving along. But the people said, "We're not leaving." They would not leave until Miriam was healed. And that is in verse 15, Numbers 12:15. So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on till she was brought back. So she was confined. Now, Moses, I will say, God wanted to kill Miriam for what she'd said and did. But Moses, like, please don't, please don't take my sister. And so God just gave her leprosy, but let it heal. But she still had to be out of the community for 7 days. And the people did not move on till she was healed. So she was well thought of in the community. They wouldn't move. They didn't want to move until she was healed and ready to go too. So that speaks to Miriam's character. That speaks to how well loved she was in the community and how respected she was. She was a leader. So here we have Miriam, a woman in Exodus, in the very early times of the Hebrew people, as a leader. And if you'll recall, if you watched the E video, and if you didn't, you can go back and watch the E video. But God's intent when He created man and woman, it wasn't for a hierarchy. God created man and woman equal. And it was after the fall that there became this tension between the two. But God has spent time since the fall trying to reconnect and having women being built back up. And it's kind of culminated when Jesus came. He liberated women and he leveled the playing field for women. Now we haven't really caught up to that, but that's what Jesus did. He leveled the playing, he elevated women. And we'll get to that. But God started that process. And Miriam, one of the first, one of the earlier women in the Bible, we find out about her leadership and that she was a leader God called her a leader. And if God can call a woman a leader of his people, and he didn't distinguish that she was only leading women, he said in Micah 6:4 that he delivered. Let me see. I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam. So, right there, God is elevating a woman to a leadership role along with two men. So, he elevated her to the level of Moses and Aaron. So, I hope this look at Miriam has helped you see that God does elevate women, does respect women, does value us, and that his scripture, his words, show us how much he values women. And that if God says that we're leaders, if God says that we're something like that, then we can be that. All right. Thank you so much. Catch me again on the Wednesday night. And if you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe so that you can get updates whenever I post and go live. Have a great day.